What is up, everyone? I'm Carla. Welcome back to our channel. In this week's tutorial, we are going to be making chocolate cosmos flowers out of sugar, not, as the name would suggest, out of chocolate, but they're called chocolate cosmos because in nature they come in these beautiful reddish brown chocolatey colors. So they're one of our favorite flowers to try to sneak into a sugar flower arrangement on a cake whenever the color palette for the event includes some of those marsala, red, and burgundy and chocolatey tones. So we hope you enjoy learning how to make this flower, and hopefully you will give this a go as well. And let's get started. First of all, you'll need some fine scissors and a rolling pin, your Dresden tool and a ball tool, as well as a silk veining tool or veining stick, and optionally a dahlia petal veiner. A cell board is useful. You'll need a Ziploc bag and a foam pad. You'll also need gum paste, of course, and an all-in-one or multi-petal flower cutter, or some teardrop-shaped cutters. You'll need some gelatin or cornmeal for making edible pollen, along with some golden yellow petal dust, or you can use commercially made stamens. And we'll need some sewing thread. You'll also want some reddish petal dust and a hemispherical mold, some 26 gauge flower wire, some cornstarch and a fluffy brush, and some water for glue. We're going to be making some edible pollen for our cosmos centers. I'm using gelatin, you can use cornmeal instead. And I'm adding some golden yellow petal dust and mixing that all up. I'm now going to wind some sewing thread about 30 times around 3 of my fingers and then trim that off. You now want to bunch up the sewing thread together and make a little figure 8 and fold it in on itself. And now take some of your 26 gauge floral wire and bend it at one end into an open hook. And then just gather those stamens or bits of thread together and close the hook. You can do the same thing with another piece of 26 gauge wire and then gather the thread up on the opposite end and then close the hook, and just make sure that each of those hooks is well closed nice and tightly with your needle nose pliers. Now you're going to cut the whole thing in 2. So now you have 2 centers that you've made. Grab some floral tape. I'm using green. You could use brown. Gather up your little thread stamens and just seal them with the floral tape at the base, and then continue wrapping the tape all the way down the wire. And I'm going to do that with my second one as well. You'll want to use some aubergine or reddish brown petal dust, whatever you have in hand that's in this color family, and then generously dust your cotton thread stamens with this petal dust to dye them, and they will hold on to the color pretty well because the cotton thread is porous. You'll also need to give your stamens a little haircut and just even them out, as you can see here. And now I'm using some corn syrup. You can use honey, you can use piping gel, you can use egg whites for this. Just dunk the stamens into your glue, and then dunk them into the edible pollen that you made. And then just let those dry for an hour or so. The alternative method, if you have some commercially made flower stamens at hand, is to do the same thing, make a hook at the end of your 26 gauge wire, and then just pull it through a bundle of stamens. Then tape the stamens together at the base just to group them together quite tightly, and then continue taping down the 26 gauge wire. You'll do the same thing, just dye the ends or the bases of the stamens in your aubergine petal dust, and then you'll also dip them into your glue and then into your pollen mixture. So let's make the all-in-one cosmos using a multi-petal cutter. I've placed a ball of gum paste into the medium-sized hole in the cell board because I'm trying to create a mound of paste there in the center, as you can see. This is called the Mexican hat method in traditional sugar flower lingo. You'll want to cut out your shape, and you can use any multi-petal cutter for this. I just happen to have this kind of interesting, slightly outdated, it's no longer being manufactured by Global Sugar Art, Cosmos petal cutter, but just pay attention there to the thinner parts of the petal where the petal is very narrow toward the center, just to make sure you don't rip them, and then just thin them out with your ball tool. Then take your silk veining tool, place that bump of paste back into the hole in your cell board, and then just roll your veining stick over each petal. And you'll want to use a reasonable amount of pressure to do this because you want a nice impression from the veining tool. Then flip your flower shape back upright, or I guess it's upside down, onto your foam pad, and then just use a Dresden tool to create some texture. Paint the center of your flower with some egg whites or water. Thread your center all the way through, and then just put some cornstarch on your fingers and make sure that the base, the belly of that mound of paste is well attached to the wire. And then bend a hook and hang that whole entire flower upside down to dry for an hour or so. And once it's been drying for an hour or two, it'll be reasonably firm. It still needs time to dry, but as you can see here, it's holding its shape pretty well, so you can dry it upright. And I'm just gonna make another one for you at warp speed here, just to show you the method again. And as I mentioned, you really can use any multi-petal flower shape. Cosmos typically have 8 petals. This one only has 6. I'm not aiming for complete botanical correctness here. What we're aiming for is a flower that's relatively quick to make and very effective and beautiful in an arrangement. I personally really don't like the term filler flower because I think it does a disservice to all the beautiful accent flowers that can be used in arrangements on cakes. If you want to treat them as filler, you certainly can, but we think they are beautiful even as focal flowers in an arrangement. So once that's been drying upside down for an hour or two, you can bend the wire straight and then stick that into a block of styrofoam to dry overnight. Now I'm going to show you how to make individually wired petals. So we're going to make 8 individually wired petals and then tape them around one of our flower centers to create a complete flower. I'm using my cell board here, rolling a log of paste and then flattening that out across the grooves of the cell board so that I have some channels into which to thread my wire. I'm using 26 gauge cloth covered floral wire here, dipping it into water, and then threading that through the channel created by the cell board. I'm using a medium ball tool and I'm going for a pretty elongated shape. You'll want to change the shape quite a lot from the original fat teardrop and make the petal quite a lot longer and narrower. And I've cut some notches, as you can see, with my scissors to create that characteristic little crinkly edge on the edge of a cosmos petal. I've used a dahlia veiner. You can use your silk veining tool to create texture, and then the Dresden tool again dragged across the back. You'll want to dry these in various cupped shapes on the backs of your hemisphere mold. Here are some cosmos in nature. They come in quite a variety of reddish and brown tones. So in this case, I'm going to add some cocoa and some red wine and some aubergine colored petal dust. The aubergine is useful here because it's actually quite close to the color of the paste. So it's a useful blending color if you need to knock back some of the darker brown tones if you added too much, or you just want to have a soft blending color over the whole petal. But I'm mixing the red wine, which is a plummy red color, and the cocoa, which is quite a dull brown color, together, and then just dusting that very gently onto my dried flower. So this flower has been drying overnight. I'm being very gentle so as not to break the petals since they're not individually wired and they're therefore not as strong as an individually wired flower. You'll want to add a bit of that dust to the center as well, just so that it's not as stark of a contrast between the yellow of the pollen and the beautiful warm reddish brown of the flower itself. And now we're going to do the same with our individually wired petals. So again, blending that red wine and cocoa petal dust together, adding a generous amount of that across the petal to pick up the texture, and then aiming more of the cocoa brown toward the base of the petal, and then just dusting the back of each petal with whatever is left on my brush. And then once you've dusted all of your petals in this way, we are gonna assemble our flowers. I'm gonna use chocolate brown floral tape for this, and to prep my petals, I'm just bending the wire carefully at the base so that I can angle my petals around the center and have the flower be opening up. I'm grouping them in order of size, so I'm gonna grab the smaller petals and add those first. I'm also here, as you can see, taping in another 26 gauge wire just for some extra strength on the stem, and wrapping my tape around, making sure it's sealed, and then adding in those first 3 smaller petals, and then wrapping around a few times, and then continuing down the stem until those petals are now locked into place. And then my final 5 petals I'm going to arrange in another row at the back. Cosmos petals are not very symmetrically staggered. If you look at them in nature, some of them are arranged in what looks like a couple of rows with some behind and some in front, while others seemingly have just one row or one layer of petals that are just fanning out in a sort of starburst pattern. So I'd say you can use your artistic discretion with this and then arrange the petals that you've made in a way that looks pleasing to you, and continue taping down your stem with your floral tape. If you like, you can even burnish your stem by rubbing it with your Dresden tool just to remove some of the lines where the floral tape overlaps to make your stem look neater if you know that it's going to be seen in an arrangement. And then just move your petals around until you're happy with where they are. And there you have it, your finished chocolate cosmos flowers. In nature, they have quite spindly little leaves, so we often like to pair them, as you see here, with anemone leaves, and I'll link to our anemone tutorial here so you can see how we made those. These are really gorgeous flowers in an arrangement. As you can see here, the chocolate cosmos add a really nice accent, and in this case, they are a balancing color for that really fiery, intense orange from the dahlia on this cake.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please give us a like, and please leave a comment for us in the comment box below with any suggestions for sugar flowers that you'd like to see us make next, or any questions that you have. I will read through them all and give you my responses as soon as I can, and we look forward to catching you in the next one. Cheers.